once again. Thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance, and we'll be speaking, of course, of the Super Bowl halftime show. I am Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timmy, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Yeah, man. Just enjoying the memes and the tomfoolery of
Tomfoolery.
of
Okay.
the yeah, I like that phrase. Of the fallout after the fallout, I guess, or the reaction to
Yeah.
the Super Bowl show. Both. There's both.
Well, this has become a bit of a tradition on Nuance. We actually started our very first live stream with
Right.
the reaction of the Super Bowl halftime show. And that one was, I believe, the Dr. Dre, 50 Cent, Eminem one, right? And
Could have been.
I guess that would have been 2022. So this will be the fourth one, believe it or not, that we've covered.
Right, right. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's what's going on there, you
Okay.
know.
I haven't really gone out of my way to look at some of these memes. Hold on a second.
Yeah. I mean, the internet's gonna do what the internet does. They're gonna meme the heck out of whatever the situation is.
Right. I haven't really gone out of my way to check them out, but it seems like every year when there's a Super Bowl halftime show, whoever is performing, whatever the act is, becomes the biggest topic of conversation on social media. So I've seen that on my
Of
Facebook.
course.
It seems inevitable that for some reason that's what people want to talk about more than anything else.
Of course. I mean, it's what just happened. It's the, recent event,
Right,
and
more than
and
the
to be
game. I
fair, in
see
the
more
United,
conversation about that halftime show than the game every year.
yeah. Yeah, I guess. Um, I mean, this year there's definitely cause for it. There's a lot of controversy for some people. It was very different. So,
Right, right.
yeah.
What about
Well, I
the
guess we can
commercials,
get
by the
it.
way? Before we get into what we think about the show, every
Right.
year people talk about these Super Bowl commercials. And to be honest with you, I can't recall one commercial that stood out to me this year. Was it not really a thing? Like, have we jumped the shark on that? People aren't discussing commercials anymore. And when I watched it, I
Yeah.
didn't think, oh, that's a cool commercial. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't even a thought.
I haven't watched any of the commercials this year yet. And see, here's the thing is like I'm not a sports guy. I don't watch sports on TV. I would prefer to play sports.
Right.
But um if super for the Super Bowl, my thing was always being interested in the commercials. So I would go and check some pages would list all the commercials that happen and I would watch those. I haven't done that yet this year. But I have heard a couple of things. Like one, there was I guess the Snoop Dogg one with that quarterback.
Tom Brady?
Um, huh?
Was it Tom Brady?
Maybe. When they're trying to talk about, peace and no hate, and people are having a backlash against that because Snoop performed for one of the Trump inauguration events, and Brady
Right.
is
Although I had heard, I mean, I didn't look into it too deeply, but I heard that wasn't quite an inauguration event. That was a crypto event, and it wasn't the same thing. I don't know.
it was a crypto event for the inauguration.
Was
So
it
Trump
for?
wasn't there, but it was for the inauguration. Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I heard kind of conflicting things. I thought that it wasn't quite for the inauguration, but somehow they were connected in some loose way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it was for the inauguration. But yeah. So there was that commercial. People were saying he was hypocritical for Brady and Snoop to do that when they're, hanging off of Trump's sack. Um,
I
what
mean,
was the other one?
I don't know. I didn't see the commercial. I did see a couple people mention that. That's really the only
Yeah.
one I think I saw a mention of. Not because it was a dope commercial, but because, like you said, because of their reaction to the messaging.
Right.
But I don't know. I guess I would like to see it. I don't think that.
I saw it.
Okay. Well, I don't think that performing at a crypto event that was tied to the inauguration would preclude you from preaching a message of tolerance or whatever the message was. You know what I mean? That's
I do.
really.
The most hateful man in the country? Yeah. Are you kidding me?
But it's
And
also
and
half the
it's
country. If it's also like basically half the country though. So if your message is bringing people together, you know what I mean.
there is no bringing people together.
You
There
can't
is no
hate.
bringing people together.
I disagree with that. I think there's a lot of common ground to be found, and you can't
They've
hate.
got to get over the hate.
You can't, but you can't, right? But so the people on our side, then you can't hate the whole half of the country. Is the point?
We can if they are the ones that are hating, sure.
Okay, the ones that are hating, but that's not the entire half of the country.
No, but the ones that are hating, like if you're doing that, supporting that person, it's like supporting, the Nazis or supporting um KKK or any of these types of groups. Like, yeah, you definitely face a backlash for that. You're in judgment for that.
I agree that you face a backlash for it, but I'm just saying I don't know if that necessarily precludes you from ever preaching a message of let's try to work on both sides, let's try to get, you know what I mean? Let's try to get
I
things done.
think it
For
shows
example, let me ask
hypocrisy.
you this. Would Snoop have performed at a crypto event for a Democratic president?
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think Snoop's message is I'm being divisive. Now I understand it's maybe inherently divisive just showing up on a stage like that, but I don't think that's where he's trying to come from.
I don't I here's the thing is first of all, like he's been very vocal and outspoken against Trump and all of the racism. There's even a video from 2017 of Snoop like calling out anyone who would dare to perform for his inauguration, saying I would, basically like, condemning anyone who would do that, and then he goes and does it this time around.
Well, that strikes
Um,
me as hypocritical. But again, does that preclude
right.
you from having a message of tolerance and peace ever in your life?
It raises questions about your credibility about believing in that.
Okay.
So it's more hypocritical that people are
Yeah.
criticizing him on.
Yeah. I would have to
So
see though. I want to see the commercial and see exactly what they talked about. What was so controversial about the message that they said?
there was nothing controversial about the message. They didn't say anything overtly political. They didn't mention any parties. It was just more about coming together type of thing. So the message itself wasn't controversial. It's the people delivering the message
Yeah.
and the hypocrisy of who's delivering the message and what they've done.
I understand some of that, especially if he said he would never do something, then turned around and did it. I understand that hypocrisy, but I guess I'll maybe compartmentalizing it a little bit because it kind of rubs me the wrong way for people to be like, we can't ever talk about coming together if we stood on the other side, or if someone appeared at an event that the other side was associated with, because that's to me saying that you don't really want to come together. So you're actually attacking the message itself at that point, not just the people delivering it.
I would disagree with that because it's like they're only preaching this message of coming together, or they're saying this message of coming together after supporting the forces of the movement that is working to tear people apart.
Yeah.
And it commonly happens when people that are in that group tearing people apart get in power, get in that position, and then they're like, okay, let's come together. Like you've been working to not do this whole time, and now you want to try to be the inclusive one once that you got what you wanted, and it's very disingenuous. It's very hypocritical.
But
It's dangerous.
we just said that Snoop was not a part of that group, though, right? We said he was on both sides, basically. He's on all.
I'd say no. I wasn't saying he was on both sides. I'm saying because he's been very vocal and critical of that whole message for all these years of the racism and all of that stuff. So,
Right. So
um,
doesn't that kind of give him credibility when he says let's come together?
not because he performed, it's because he performed at the inauguration that was honoring Trump. That's where his message becomes suspect. So the speculation on why he did it, no one says. He hasn't come out and said why he does it. He did it. He's just blatantly kind of ignored it. Some of the others have come out and addressed it directly, like Nelly, and Soldier Boy. Nelly is basically completely conspiracy theory.
Right.
Um, Snoop hasn't addressed it yet, but it's very, disappointing and controversial for a lot of people.
Yeah. It's just to me, I guess, taking a step back, and again, not having seen the commercial, right? So I don't know what you said.
Again, the message you
Yeah.
probably it's I don't think the message is anything to disagree with
Okay.
from my
Yeah, I'm just
recollection.
thinking of it right, just in terms of a generic message of let's come together should not really be seen as harmful. Now I get
Well,
that there
here's the thing. It's like this.
the
It's kind of
hypocrisy of the
similar.
players.
Yeah, but it's kind of similar to this. Let's say after the Civil War,
Right.
a former slave master and Confederate general goes on TV and it's like, okay, everyone, let's come together for
Right,
the
but
good
we're
of the
saying that
country.
Snoop,
We should
but
have
Snoop is not
peace.
that though, right? We're saying Snoop was actually very critical of Trump, so he's not a former slave master or Confederate general.
Yes, but he's performed for the inauguration in honor of Trump. He didn't
Well, would he
stand
have?
on
I
his
understand that,
support.
and again, and that's worthy of critique. But
So that's the critique.
I understand that part of it. But we
Yeah.
also said he probably would have performed for a Democratic president also. So if his message is let's come together, he's basically saying I don't care who the president is. We're America. We all have to be Americans. Let's come together, right?
Yeah, but it is stance before and his action now, because we don't know what his stance is now. He hasn't said anything, but we know what his recent action is. Are they oppose each other. So
Yeah,
that's
and
where
again, I
the
understand that there,
hypocrisy is.
right, that there may be some hypocrisy to point out in some of those
Right.
nuances of the behavior. But again, I don't think that puts him in the same light as a slave master.
No, but I'm saying as far as the movement that he represented or he performed for. Maybe it was an extreme example on that, but in a similar vein in that it's like it's okay. I guess it would be more like a I guess someone diehard MAGA coming out and doing that. So maybe Brady's diehard
Yeah,
MAGA.
okay. But
Okay,
right, and
something
that's
in that.
right, and that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. I, I don't really know much about Brady, but as far as
I
Snoop,
don't either, to be
yeah,
fair. But
as
yeah.
far as Snoop goes, it seems to me it's more like him performing at this crypto event might be in the same vein as him saying let's come together, right? In other words, him maybe he's saying
No.
I'm a Democrat, I don't believe in what's going on, but I'm doing this as an olive branch, as a show that listen, we're all Americans and we're gonna hope our president doesn't fail us because we're on the same boat.
Yeah, no, I don't give him that grace.
Why?
I don't give him that grace.
Well, but why don't you see it in that light?
Because of his previous stance, for
But you just
one.
said his previous stance was against Trump.
Right. And so now he's going to perform for it. And it was a very aggressive stance. The previous stance was very aggressive
Well,
on
that's what
it.
I'm saying. So
You
isn't
know,
that so? Can't you then look at that as potentially him saying, I aggressively opposed the agenda and I didn't vote for him, right? I wouldn't support him. But now that he's president, I believe we all should come together as a country. Isn't that kind of
no,
congruent with the commercial?
no, I
No?
don't, no, it's hypocritical for his stance. It's, yeah.
And I agree that I think it's worthy of critique as far as the hypocrisy there, especially if he was very strongly opposed at one point to come out. And again, I
And
was told,
it's not just the agenda. It's everything that it represents. And there's a lot of other factors there. You know, Snoop being a black man and Trump's agenda and his movement, his rhetoric is very racist,
mhm.
and performing for that in
Yeah,
any sort of
I,
capacity.
I
Like
was
there's a
told that
lot
that was
to it.
not an inaugural event, but you're saying that it was. So I don't know.
Yeah, it was one of them. Like it's Trump wasn't there. I don't think it was set up um his
Right. What
inauguration committee
that's
or
what I'm
whatever
saying.
that
Right.
is.
So it wasn't an official inauguration event, but it was like adjacent to it.
It was in honor of it was one of the inaugural events, but I don't know if it was I don't think it was set up by the RNC
Right.
or any of that type of stuff.
Or his campaign or
Yeah,
anything.
right.
Right. All right.
But
Well,
that
yeah.
was one commercial that I did see. I heard about the Eugene Levy where like his eyebrows flew off or something like that. Was supposed to be
Okay.
funny. Um,
I really didn't notice any of them. Maybe it
the
wasn't paying.
Clydesdales, they brought the Clydesdales back. People are talking about that. There was some
Okay.
nostalgia. So
All right.
I don't know.
Well, you know what? I wanted to ask you to do this while we're here. The
Uh-oh.
whole Gulf of America thing.
Oh,
Now
Jesus
they
Christ.
updated Google Maps here in the US, and I just
Right,
mentioned it before. When I look on Google Maps now and I go down to that part of the continent, it says Gulf of America. I was told
right.
that in other countries, it has different results. Some still say Gulf of Mexico, and some say both now. So, what does yours show?
That's a good question. I never thought to look for that.
Go check it out.
Um,
Let's see.
it says both.
It says
I guess
Gulf
you
of
can't see it here, but it says both. It says Gulf of Mexico and then in parentheses Gulf of America.
Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
I guess they are.
It's not showing on the screen here
Yeah.
because of the blur.
Blur.
the
Yeah.
background blur.
So I guess they're showing both outside of the US to avoid confusion, since in the US that's how it's being referred to now.
It's so stupid. Here, let's see if we can get it up here. There we go.
It's kind of hard to see, but yeah, I do see. Yes, I see it now. Parentheses Gulf of America. Yep.
Yeah.
See, mine doesn't say
So,
that. Mine says just Gulf of America.
and it's
It actually, though, you know what's weird about that? I know the idea behind it is to be, I guess, what, patriotic, America first, all this kind of stuff, nationalist, whatever. But in a weird way, it actually makes it less so, because when it was the Gulf of Mexico, it was more American centric, right? In that, where that's at least how I would think of it. Like we are Americans, but we go down there, and now we're getting close to Mexico, right? So it's like it's naming it in terms of, or from the point of view of an American. Now, when you put it Gulf of America, you're almost reversing it. You're almost saying like, well, to the Mexicans, it, this is the water that gets you closer to America or borders with the United States. You know what I mean? So it's almost making it less American centric in that regard.
I don't get that point. Uh,
Meaning, like when I
but
was a kid and I was told this was the Gulf of Mexico, it made sense to me as an American because I'm thinking this is the water that Mexico sits on, right? So
okay.
from an American's point of view, that this is our border with Mexico, basically by water.
Yeah, but I mean, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, they all sit on the Gulf of Mexico.
I know that's what I'm saying. But so when
So
you're in,
you're saying that going into the water, they're in Mexico? Was
no,
that
what
what
I'm saying
you're
is
thinking?
from an American's point of view, this is a geographical feature that describes our proximity to another country. So it's kind of
Yeah,
like
I don't.
it always struck me as like an American centric name to call it the Gulf of Mexico, because it's like saying that this is water that separates us from Mexico. Like what is this water useful for? It gets us to Mexico, or it separates us at Mexico. So what is the us? The United States. If you call it Gulf of America, it's like saying this is almost like Mexico's water, and they're saying this is the Gulf that takes us to America.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't get that at all.
You don't get
Um,
that?
I think this is first of all, I think it's stupid to make
Like,
this renaming.
let me think of another.
But
I agree, it's stupid and performative and all
but
that.
I think
I
part of
think
it, this is
it does the opposite of what it intends to do in a sense.
I don't know what he really intends. I suspect it's more about egotistical influence.
Yeah.
Like this is ours. This is
Yeah, 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 yeah.
America's. Just like they've just renamed what did they renamed what was the mountain? They named it back to Mount Rainier, but it was
Oh,
it
you're talking
was
about Mount
previous
McKinley.
Mount McKinley, and they renamed,
Denali.
yeah,
It was
right,
Denali, right? Back to McKinley.
Denali, and they went back to Mount McKinley because they just want to reverse that, and then they just renamed Fort Bragg
Mm.
because it was changed to Fort Liberty because originally Fort Bragg was named after a Confederate general, and we've had it as in honor of a Confederate general all these years. They changed the name to Fort Liberty to be more inclusive, and then now just yesterday, that Fox News host who's the put Trump put in his cabinet changed it back to Fort Bragg, and he's like, Fort Bragg is back, baby.
Right.
Um,
Okay. So let me give you another example as to why the Gulf of Mexico struck me as of a more American centric name as it stood. Let's say there was a bridge between New York and New Jersey called the New Jersey Bridge, or the Bridge to Jersey. Let's say it was called the Bridge to New Jersey, right? And it was then changed to the Bridge to New York. By
yeah,
doing,
but there's a difference. There's a difference. You're adding two in there.
but that's of Gulf of Mexico. So it's kind of in a similar kind of vein to me. When I hear the term, like Bridge to New Jersey, to me would strike me as a New York centric name because it's being defined in terms of a New Yorker's perspective, right? Whereas if you were to switch it around, yeah, now you're putting New York in the name, the Bridge to New York, but it sounds like it's a New Jersey thing now, right? It's how New Jerseys get to New York. So to me, switching it around to the Gulf of America is like basically the Mexicans are going to look at it like, yeah, that water there, go to the other side of it, you'll be in America, as opposed to what it used to be, which is that water there separates us from Mexico.
Yeah, I think it's only you who thinks that.
I don't know. I think psychologically there's something to that.
You mean Seinfeld logically? I think that sounds like that type of argument.
Seinfeld, logically.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those arguments
Like a
from a
Larry David type
Seinfeld.
thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I understand like the name of it, Gulf of
So,
America, is like, beating the chest, patriotic type
and
nonsense.
it's the same also with this idea of wanting to rename Greenland to USA, what Red, White, and Blue land. Like
That's so
that's
stupid.
like it's insanity. Anyway, that's insanity. Yes, James, I agree. I refuse to call it the Gulf of America. And again, I also agree asking why are we honoring Confederate generals? They're traitors. I mean, that's what everyone's asking, except for these people that are changing these names back.
Right. Right. And everything's also being done with executive order, meaning it's not, I guess, officially changed without legislative action through Congress, but the maps are being changed, right? And the agencies are being
Right.
directed to call things different names now. And, it's all the stuff is like not
Yes.
official law without a law, right,
Yes.
from Congress, but they're acting as though they can just do whatever. They're just telling people to say, well, without the law, without the official legislation
Right.
designating it, we're just going to call it what we say. We're just going to do it how we say to do it, even though none of this is really official.
Right. We've seen that recently with what was it when they shut off funds for something, and then the judge overruled that, said you can't do that. And then recently they just said we're gonna do it anyway, even though the judge said to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of things going on here that's just insane. So,
All right. Well, is
but
that
we
a
were
segue?
back on the commercials.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, were there a couple of things going on at the halftime show that were just insane?
Yes, there was a lot. So now there's criticism on the halftime show. I've seen people saying that it was boring, that they didn't understand it, it didn't connect with them. And other people saying it was one of the greatest things ever. It's very divided in that regard. Um, so
What if it's somewhere in between that? What if you got to give it a grade and it's going to be A minus?
ha ha ha, I see what you did there. Here's the thing. In my opinion here, I thought it was a good halftime show.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was really exciting. There was a lot of things that made it really special for me. However, I can see this wasn't a flashy, pyrotechnics fueled type of performance, right? There wasn't a lot of that type of thing, a lot of lights and all of this. So from that point of view, I could see where people would be like, wow, this is kind of boring, this is kind of dull, it's kind of flat, right? It wasn't this is one thing that's a bonus and maybe a drawback, depending on how you look at it. It wasn't a
Yeah.
chorus fueled performance. This was lyric heavy. This was
Right.
just straight
Right. Right.
bars,
Right.
right? He
Right.
didn't even
Right.
lean into his hooks very much.
Exactly, exactly. And that's why I loved it for what it was.
Yes.
And I understand there are people who aren't going to get it. I saw a funny video and I don't know what state it is. People have different dialects, even in the US, right? It might have been in the South somewhere, but it was an old man. I think it was a grandfather sitting on his couch, elderly white dude, watching it. And I guess he's there with his whole family and they're taking video of his reaction. And he's going, What is he saying? What is he even trying to say? What is he saying? He kept saying, like, I don't even know what he's trying to say. Like, he couldn't understand a word of it. And I
Right.
understand that not just because some older
Oh,
folks, what happened to my camera here?
I don't know. Your camera just cut.
What's going on?
Um,
We're
it
having
said, please run
constitutional
camera.
crisis in the camera.
Yeah.
Try unplugging and replugging.
Yeah. We seem to have
It says
having
camera.
gotten some technical difficulties here.
You
We
still hear
got
me, right? Here we go.
I still hear you. Yeah.
I can see me now. We're
Yeah,
good. We're
your
back.
voice never cut out.
Okay.
So
We're
continue
back, right?
the
No,
oh, nope.
we were back. Yeah, we're back again. We're good. We're good.
And not really. You're back, but you're stuttering.
How about now?
Oh, now you're good.
Yeah.
All
Sorry
right.
about that.
So the old man dancing.
Yeah, the old man didn't get it, and I understand not just from the perspective of some older people or certain folks
Yeah.
don't understand hip hop, but Kendrick himself. speaks with more of a regional dialect, I guess you would say, or he
Yeah.
raps, he presents that way, right? His diction isn't as clear as it could be even by rapper standards.
Yes. Yeah. I know. I agree with that. And that's, again, I'm not a big, I wasn't a big Kendrick fan. I'm not one of those guys. I haven't listened to all of his stuff type of thing. Part of it was because of, you know, that, but also because some of his stuff seemed a little weird to me.
Yeah,
But I've always said that I like his movement. I like where his headspace is at. And so even though I'm not that big of Kendrick fan, some of the stuff is a little odd sometimes. But if he is the next archetype for the next movement in hip hop, I'm completely okay with that.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, he's not really new though. He's been around for a long time.
no, and like I said it
Yeah,
back, in the day when he was more kind of new and whatnot. But yeah, I thought I can see from that perspective how some people might not vibe with it. To
right.
me,
Now, even look, I'll be honest. Even when I first heard "Not Like Us" and he goes, mustard on the beat, I didn't even understand that part. I thought he was saying "must be on the beat." Like the way he talks is not very clear all the time.
right, right, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But from a message wise
Yeah.
and a certain aspect of performance wise, I thought it was great. First, the lyric heavy.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That this is just straight spitting basically
At the
for
Super
12
Bowl.
minutes.
Exactly. And that's what was so beautiful about it to me. And the fact that people are complaining about that, like that's the exact thing that I'm happy about. The fact that
Yeah.
this is what you got. You got all steak, no sizzle at the Super Bowl. And I think from a hip hop
Yes.
head's perspective, is something we always kind of fantasized about, but we would see the flash. I think this maybe is a disconnect right here because I would always see the theatrics, right? The pageantry at the Super Bowl. And you can appreciate it for what it is, but there's a part of me as a hip hop head that goes, man, like it's just covering up. It's just it's
Yeah.
all flash. I want to see more substance. I want to see someone who can really get down. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so in my mind, every hip hop has fantasy is more of this. It's more of let's strip it down. Let's remove all of the
Right.
actors. Let's remove the pageantry. See, what I would love to see is someone on stage put Nas up there with a spotlight and a mic getting down for 15 minutes. Nothing else. No backup dancers, no singing, no choruses, right? No pyro, nothing. Just an MC with a mic for 15 minutes. Now, to some people, they're like, well, what the hell? It's a Super Bowl halftime show. We want to see people swinging from the chandeliers that don't even
Right.
exist in the stadium, but we're going to create them artificially. All this kind of, you know what I mean? But from a hip hop head's perspective, we like
Right.
the simplicity of it. We like the fact that it's just here is a dude with a mic getting down. This is what hip hop is in its purest form.
Right, right. And that part is incredible. That it even happened like that. So that was one part I liked.
Yeah. And
Um,
then also, I think I mentioned this somewhere, not a whole lot of guest appearances, even, right? You
not
said,
a whole lot.
yeah, you
No.
said not chorus heavy. I think he had what SZA for a little bit, but really not a whole lot of it.
Right.
Much of it was just him rapping verses, right?
Exactly.
Crazy, crazy.
Exactly.
Usually, even when you see hip hop at the Super Bowl, it's a medley of the choruses of the biggest hit songs, right? He wasn't
Right.
doing that. Now, to be fair, I'm not the biggest fan of his music, so I don't know how popular all these songs were. I Googled it earlier. I think some of the main songs were on there. Someone said, yeah, like one song he
Yeah.
did has over 1 billion plays. So some of the songs were big. I think Humble, maybe. But I
Yeah.
think some of them probably weren't the biggest hits either. It was just really him rapping.
Right. And yeah, so that was another thing, the guest appearances. There were some and they were I think they were strategic guest appearances. They weren't just to have um so the message of it I really enjoyed. That's one thing I like in hip hop. I love messages. I love bars, I love messages, I love that type of thing. So I thought that was great. I mean there was a clear um uh, commentary on social political situations, on
Yeah.
society,
Yeah.
with
Samuel
the
L.
dancers
Jackson
making
dressed
up the
as Uncle
American
Sam.
flag. Sorry,
Samuel L. Jackson dressed as Uncle Sam.
as Uncle Sam, but not just dressed as Uncle Sam, but he was dressed as Uncle Sam and basically being that voice of America that that tells him like, you know, you can't do this. You shouldn't do this. You're being too ghetto. You're being too loud,
Too
and
edgy,
him
too
doing it
controversial.
anyway.
Yeah, too
Too
real,
edgy, too controversial.
too
Yes.
hip hop, too hip hop. And basically, he was saying, look at the comment
Yes.
section. They want to see Cirque du Soleil dancing, and you're just rapping. What are you doing, bro?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And he even kind of said that too. He's like, you almost there. Don't mess it up.
Yeah,
Like, because he did
yeah,
after he did the one with the hook, he's like, that's what I'm talking about. Now
right,
you're almost there. Don't mess it up. Like,
right, right. The voice of reason, so to speak. But
right.
people were
I like,
confused even with the red, white, and blue. Some of the conservatives, I guess, were like, "Well, I like that he has the American flag on there," but then they didn't realize the messaging behind it, and how it cut in half, and everything, and what he was really trying to get at.
right. And I thought that was beautiful that the dancers made up the red, white, and blue flag, made up the American flag. I thought that was great. And then as far as guest appearances, again, Sam Jackson as Uncle Sam, which was good. Um, SZA and SZA on there. I think there was twofold. They got a song together. SZA's also one of Drake's exes,
Okay. See, I didn't know that. I heard about Serena Williams though, and she was dancing.
and Serena's also one of
Yeah,
Drake's exes,
yeah. I
and
knew
she's
about that.
dancing on the Not Like Us.
Right, which tells you, man, there must have been something going on between them, right?
Oh yeah, no, there was a lot. Apparently, Drake made a bunch of songs about Serena, and even questioning her husband. And they've been a social media back and forth, and the husband even posted some things on there like, "Listen, like we're good over here. Like, why don't you stay out of our business?" type of thing. So Drake was, acting crazy. So I think
Yeah,
that
so
that
yeah,
made a
because
statement.
yeah, okay, so maybe there's just some personal bitterness there. My
Yeah.
thought watching it was like, wow, she is an ex of his, and she's dancing to this song where he's accusing him of being a pedophile. Does she know something? Is she basically co-signing his being a pedophile?
I don't think it had to do with that, but who knows? I don't think it had to do with that, but I think it had to do with that back and forth beef they had. But there's
That's
also,
really crazy. But I guess if Drake was talking crazy about her, she felt justified maybe being out there. But you would think like if it's your ex, you would want to protect them a little bit. You know, like, you wouldn't want to go out there and dance while someone's dissing the guy, unless you really have bad feelings for them.
yeah, well, Drake has been making nasty comments against her and her husband.
Right, right. Well, that makes it make more sense, I guess.
Yeah, but also I think that there's another folk because even in Not Like Us, one of the lyrics is "Don't talk about Serena."
Is it?
Yeah, so
Okay.
he's don't speak on Serena. And then another point is Serena was doing the Crip Walk, which she was
Right.
highly criticized for
I heard
after
about that.
winning at Wimbledon. Yeah.
Oh no, but someone had said, and I don't know if it was a Crip, but someone said that she shouldn't do that because it was a Crip who gunned down her sister.
I didn't hear about that one. So that's I can that's one point that I have with this. I understand like this redemption or this defiance of her dancing there because she was criticized for doing that. And some people are saying, she's from Compton, so this is part of that local culture. But we do tend to forget that it's because it's gone so mainstream that this Crips is a gang. This is
Right.
a criminal organization, and this dance is from that criminal organization. It's not the Compton people culture.
Yeah.
And people from
Although the
Compton may
people,
think of it differently, but
yeah, I think I saw Snoop, or I think it was either Snoop or Cube, saying that, listen, at this point it's just a mainstream dance. Like, it's just a dance that we do from Compton. It doesn't mean that we're affiliated with it. Like, we're claiming a gang when we do it, but not everyone may see it that way.
right, absolutely. So I think there was a point to be made for that with her there, and then of course SZA as Drake's ex, but also a collaborator of Kendrick Lamar. So, yeah, I enjoyed it. Personally, I enjoyed it, especially as a hip hop head. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too, me too. And like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of his, and
Right.
so that wasn't what I enjoyed. I enjoyed what it represented, and to me,
Yeah.
it represented progress. I think as a hip hop head, like I said, we always kind of wanted to see this. I think we might have even touched on it back in 22 when we started this, talking about we really want to see rappers spitting. I probably mentioned Nas back then, and we were like, we couldn't really envision it going that far. We were like, with Snoop and Dre and Eminem, at least these are big pop stars as well, and these are big songs, crossover songs that are big, huge
I
mainstream hits, and everyone knows, right? And we said that was great for hip hop, but maybe that was as far as it was going to go in terms of pushing that envelope, right? I think this pushed it even further. This opens the door now, in my opinion, for someone even less mainstream to come on. Someone like
Mm.
Nas. I could see that now. What if Nas got up there and did all of Illmatic at the halftime show? I think honestly, that would probably be better received by most of America than the Kendrick performance.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like Nas is mainstream, but yeah, I've always said Nas is probably the biggest underground artist
Right.
there is because like he is mainstream, he does those kind of numbers, but he doesn't do like a lot of pop music.
Right. But that's my point, right? That would be the next step beyond what Kendrick was, because Kendrick does do bigger numbers, like we said, billions of streams. And so he is
Right.
more mainstream in that regard. But when you continue walking down this path, right, what is the next
Right.
iteration of
It
that,
was the
right?
next, yeah.
Taking someone who's still mainstream, but maybe even less mainstream than Kendrick is, and maybe even more stripped down than Kendrick is. I don't know. Maybe that's me fantasizing too much as a hip hop head. Maybe I'm too much, but I would,
Yeah, I don't
like I
know if we're
said,
gonna do that.
I would love to see a halftime show with just a stage, a spotlight, an MC, and a mic. Like he said, all I need is one mic. That would be beautiful for me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the stage, that was another thing I thought was really interesting about this performance, and is that the way it was laid out. There was like 9 different quadrants of it. This was a pretty
Yeah.
wide, it was more of a field
Mm-hmm.
performance instead of like on one specific stage. And there was a lot going on in different areas, and he moved around. There was movement in the performance because there was different parts set up for each area, and I thought that was creative and really well done.
Right. I saw some people complaining though that he wasn't, I guess, dancing. I don't know what they expected, but they were like, "How is that a show? He's just walking around." Someone said.
Well, he had dancers to do the dancing. He's
Right.
got bars to spit. There was a
Right.
lot of words.
Right. Right. That's the thing. I think some people maybe if they didn't understand the words, they
Yeah.
weren't able then to appreciate the show because the show really was lyrics, right? So if
Right.
you tune
Lyrics.
out that part of it, then you're not left with a whole lot.
Right. And then I mean we got it the big controversial point was people waiting to hear Not Like Us and
Yeah.
seeing how that was gonna play, if he
And the
was
way
gonna
he
do it.
set that up, right? That reminded me, I don't know if you were at this show or not. It reminded me of the Q&5 Mega Show and Pac FM's performance when
Mm,
he came out. I think you might have been there that year. It was at BB King's, I think. He came out with
I
the
was at
cane,
that one, yeah.
right? He had injured his leg or whatever. He was there with
Yeah.
the cane. And he would do his set and he set it up where, he would do some even more underground songs than he usually does, like just straight spitting joints. And then people would start chanting, stomp, 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 because that was his
Right.
signal for that, right? And he kept going, no, 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 like in unison, like back to the beat. They're going, stomp, stomp, stomp. And he was like swinging the cane in the air, no, no, no. And like he kept doing the set. And the whole set was basically building that tension for him to eventually perform stomp and everyone go crazy at the end. And that's
Right.
kind of what this was, right? Where he teased it. And then he kind of said he wasn't going to do it. Maybe he was listening to the Samuel Jackson conscience. What do you call that? The super ego, I guess, right? Telling him not to do
Right.
it. And then the id wins out at the end. So it was that tension that he built so that when he did it, it became more noteworthy or it hit harder, right? It was like, wow, we were kind of waiting for this. He said he wasn't going to do it, but could he really not do it? We even asked, I think, last
Right.
week, does he have to do it now? Bill Maher, by the way, asked the same thing on overtime. Does he have to do it now? So, this question has been asked, and he
Yeah.
ended up doing it.
What's tricky about it is like he has to do it. I mean, that was the song of the summer. He
It
just
just
won
swept the
five.
Grammys.
He won
Song of the
five
year,
Grammys
right?
for it.
Actual, not just hip hop, not just rap, actual song of the year at the Grammys.
Right. So he has to do it. The thing is that it's a diss track that openly calls out one of the largest artists for the past 10 years. And so the question was, how is he going to do that? Was he going to keep it intact? Was he going to be direct with it? And he largely did. Like that
Mhm.
moment when he said Drake's name and he looked directly into the camera and he grinned
Yeah.
and said it like, say Drake, I hear you like him young. Like that was crazy. That
That was
was
like saying, yeah, like the lawsuit, your lawsuit's ain't going to stop me from saying this.
yeah, that was insane. Like, could you imagine? Like, imagine, if this was 20 years ago or something like that, and Nas is doing Ether at the
Right.
Super Bowl, right?
Right.
Or Ice Cube does No Vaseline.
Wow. Wow. And that's also, by the way, what made it such a monumental moment for me in terms of how far hip hop has come in the world, right? A diss record
A diss
performed
record.
at the halftime show, never before in history.
Now, he did censor the word
Yeah.
the word the pedo word, which I
Right.
expect I wouldn't be surprised. I wasn't
Right.
surprised so much
Right.
because it is primetime television. Um,
And there's a
but when he
defamation lawsuit
said,
underway.
huh?
And there's a defamation lawsuit about that underway.
When he said that when it came to the part of A minor and the whole stadium erupted, that is insane.
It is, although I do question whether that was part of the track.
Nah, it wasn't part of the
You
track.
don't think so?
I don't think it was part of the track, but I think that they probably brought
I
up the
put mics.
audience
Right, right,
background.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Because you usually when you have the performance, because you could hear it, and one of the critiques I had about his performance was that the mic seemed a little bit dull
Mhm.
at points. Um, so they probably just raised up the background noise a little bit so that you could hear it. But I do think that's what the noise was in the stadium. They just didn't suppress it during that time. But
Right, that makes sense. They probably just boosted the crowd at that point.
yeah,
But
but that
um,
that was it like tens of thousands of people? Like that
yeah,
had to hurt. Toronto had a bad night. That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. So someone mentioned this, and I got to go back and take a closer look. They said that he didn't have any backing tracks over his vocals. I think that might be
No,
true.
he definitely did. He
He did.
definitely did. Uh,
Okay.
Um, as far as his bars, I
Yeah.
don't think so. The hooks, because when he did Not Like Us, he didn't say the hook not like us. It was the backing track saying it. So
But
that
look.
was another critique that I had. It was kind of flat there
Mm,
because he should have been on a mic going, they not like us, but he didn't. It was just the backing track. He just went, yup, yup.
okay. So he was
So
ad-libbing to his own backing.
yeah,
But the verses, though,
the
did they
verses were
do they have backups? So because sometimes you'll do a TV track, right, where
right,
you'll take out the main vocal of the verse, but you'll keep the ad libs in and you keep the backups in, which will
right,
help you stay on, and it also gives your vocals more of a presence. And
right,
for a live performance, that's helpful, especially when you're moving around, you got stuff going on. I
right.
heard,
I
and
don't
again,
know if there was.
I've got to go back and look. Someone said that he didn't have any of that in there.
That would be interesting. I mean, there were a couple of parts, like there was a part where he was rapping to the acapella sounds.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think there was any backing part there. The intro where he came in and he was on the Grand National car on the hood, and it was basically almost an acapella as well, or at least a minimal background of music. I don't
Yeah.
think there was anything there.
Yeah, and that is crazy to do,
Yeah,
and you got to give someone credit for being able to get through that. No real stumbles as far as I knew. I mean, he pretty much
I
stayed on
didn't
the
see
whole
it. I
time.
didn't catch any.
Yeah, yeah. And
I
so,
didn't catch it. There might have been one that seemed like a little falter off, not off beat, but just maybe catching his breath type of thing. But other than that, no, I thought it was almost pretty flawless.
yeah, yeah, pretty clean. And again, by himself for the most part. Didn't have
Yes.
a lot of people helping him
No
out.
hype
Hopefully.
man.
Right, right,
No.
right. And so that in itself, I think, is worthy of respect. And these
Yeah,
are
no,
things that I think a lot of people, if they're not into hip hop, aren't going to appreciate. And that's the thing
no.
that rubbed me the wrong way about a lot of the criticism that I saw. It was mostly coming from people who don't know or enjoy hip hop. And to me, you don't really have that same credibility to speak on it. It would be like me trying to critique a country performance at the Super Bowl or another genre that I'm not into. I might be like, it's not for me subjectively.
Right.
But for me to be like, that's the worst show ever, how could I say that when I don't even know that genre?
Well, I think there's a mix of there. It's not just to people that don't listen to hip hop. I think there was definitely part of this cultural divide that he spoke on, that we know is here. There was definitely some racism that's a part of it. There's this anti-DEI type of movement as well. I think all of that played into it. Um,
Right. And
and
yeah,
and there was also some of the stuff that we pointed out earlier that this was not a very flashy show. So like if it was a country singer doing a performance, we may not listen to country, but there's probably some pyrotechnics going on. There's probably a lot of like flash and lights and all this and that, so we can be like, well, there's a spectacle there. There
Right, but
wasn't
I
a
still
lot
wouldn't
of
like it. If it's not my kind of music, I wouldn't like it. Maybe I'd find certain things about it I would appreciate or whatever, but it wouldn't
right.
be for me. But I
Yeah,
wouldn't feel qualified then to go online and speak on it and say why it sucked if I don't understand that style of music in the first place.
true, 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 true. So
So
we'll see, So, question before we finish with this topic.
I was going to say on the point that you made about the divide, the cultural divide.
Yeah.
To me, this is indicative of the fact that we have maybe devolved or regressed as a society in some way because hip hop, although it's gotten bigger, we talk about how the numbers have been getting bigger for the viewership for the halftime shows since hip hop came in, all that kind of stuff. While that may be true, culturally, I don't think hip hop was as divisive as it is now. When it started out, yes, but there was a period of time, I would say like late 90s, maybe early 2000s, where it seemed like everyone was kind of into hip hop. Not everyone, but like, most people appreciated it, enjoyed it. Whereas now it's almost seems like it's like half the country. It's like almost seems like if you're a conservative, you can't like rap anymore, which is a different thing that we're used to.
Well, it's the racism that's creeped in, I think. Because it's that black thing,
But isn't that
which
society moving backwards in a sense?
I think it is moving backwards. Yeah. I think that was part of the beginning too. I think it's moving backwards in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, we've had an interesting run of performances since Jay got involved with a lot of representation for hip hop and R&B and connected to this culture that we're both part of.
Yeah.
Um, and to me, that's progress. I think it's a good thing.
Right. Oh
So
yeah, there's definitely a lot of good in it. I'm just thinking as a society, and it's something that I've kind of wrestled with a little bit when people will make that point to me that well, hip hop is at its biggest point in history, right? It's the most popular genre. The numbers are the biggest.
right,
They'll tell me that it's more successful now than it's ever been, and by
right,
some metrics that is true. But I just think about it culturally. Like I think about, for example, what people are playing in their cars.
right,
Not just in certain areas, but you go to the suburbs, you go to predominantly white neighborhoods. There was a time when people would be playing mostly hip hop, even in white neighborhoods. Now
right.
I hear mostly other types of music, country, rock, pop, whatever. I don't really hear rapping anymore coming out of cars in white neighborhoods. That's a different, you know what I mean? That's culturally different. It just felt like
Yeah.
culturally hip hop was at the forefront, maybe like a
I think
decade
it's
ago,
still,
maybe
I
like
think it
years.
still is. I think it still is, but it's probably a different form of hip hop. It's more of that. What was that category that we were talking about the other day?
Melodic rap.
Melodic rap or something like that. I think
Yeah.
it's probably something in that vein.
I don't really even hear that. I'm telling you, like there were certain areas I would go, like just driving around New York, right? You go to different neighborhoods.
Yeah.
You would be in a certain neighborhood in the early 2000s. You would hear stuff
Yeah.
like 50 Cent or Jay-Z or Nas or Eminem, maybe, or different things coming out of car speakers. Now you go to these areas, you're not really hearing hip hop. You're not hearing
Yeah.
Migos or whatever's popping out. You're not really hearing Kendrick. You're hearing Sweet Home Alabama or something. It's different.
Sweet Home Alabama. I don't really. And
Yeah.
listen. Sweet Home Alabama is a dope track, though.
It's a
You
dope
can't.
track. It's a dope track, but I'm saying like you don't really hear hip hop represented the way you used to.
Right. Okay. Okay. So where would you? Some people are saying best Super Bowl halftime show ever. Some are saying the worst. Where do you put this?
It's hard for me to say. Again, I'm biased because I'm such a hip
Sure.
hop fan. So in that regard, it's near or at the top. But
Ooh.
how are you going to compare it to shows that are not hip hop shows? And again, shows that I'm not going to enjoy. I'll be honest. I primarily listen to hip hop, and so when someone gets up
Mm.
there singing, I don't like singing for the most part. You know what I mean? Like I don't like the way sung vocals sound. I like the way rap vocals sound. So
Right.
when people are singing, I'm not going to like it so much. You know what I mean? So it's hard
Right.
to compare it apples to apples. Um, so
It's very subjective, obviously. It's very
yeah,
subjective.
what am I really judging it against? You know what I mean? The other two rap shows that we've had, and in that sense, I don't know. We could do this. Compare it to the first one that had the medley performance of Dre and Snoop and all them, and Kendrick was on that as well. I think you can compare those, right? They did two different things. They had two different objectives, I would say. Um, I might give the edge to the other one, to the first one. That one had
Mm.
more pageantry. That one did have more flash, and so maybe it was less quote unquote authentically hip hop. But maybe that did more to more people. Maybe that gave hip hop a better global or nationwide representation on that stage. Maybe
Or it
that
spoke to, it's
spoke to
probably
more.
spoke to more a wider range of people because of the pageantry, because of the hooks, because of the guest appearances.
Exactly right. The iconic nature of the artist. It checked more boxes, I guess, in that
Right.
sense, what more people are looking for from their performance. So if you're trying to judge it on an objective scale, maybe you would say, okay, that one covered more ground. But going back to the hip hop purist in me, right? This one is like kind of like a slap in the face of tradition, which is what I love, right? That's kind of what hip hop is in its most authentic form, right? It's edgy, it's a little controversial, it's supposed to make you a little uncomfortable, it's supposed to push the envelope, it's supposed to challenge your way of thinking. And this one did all of that, I think, to more people.
Right. That's true. I'll say this, you can't be the greatest Super Bowl performance of all time if you don't show any nipple. So I'm just saying,
Well, you know
you
what?
know,
And that's actually an interesting point because some people who were critical of the performance said, well, I appreciated that they all kept their clothes on.
yeah. And that's another thing. There was no skin, flashing of
Yeah.
skin type of thing.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, listen, I thought I enjoyed it. So, hey, interesting things. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you guys think
but
out there? We'll put this as the poll and see how people thought, and maybe some people have the opportunity now to revisit it right after it first happened. You have your initial reaction, your first impressions, then you go online and start reading. I did see some of that as well. Some people said they didn't understand it when they first saw it, but now, looking up the lyrics and reading into the messaging, now they get it more. So what do you think about it now, right? So the poll question of the week is, what are your thoughts on the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show?
yeah, yeah, good question there. And we've had several polls over the last couple of weeks that we did not get to, but we have results now.
Yeah,
So
let's hear
you
them.
want to go ahead and get into those?
Let's do it.
So we had the poll regarding the landlords and the good cause eviction law. And so we asked the poll, do you believe landlords should be able to evict tenants just because their lease is up? Now, according to the good cause eviction law, um, that's not necessarily the case. They can't, just because the term is over, they can't evict tenants. And so that kind of limits the freedom of the landlords and whatnot, but it's also in effort to help protect renters in a time when they need it. So
Hold on a second.
uh,
So did we ask specifically about the provision that allows them, the tenants, to stay in after the lease is up, or just about the law in general?
we asked, the specific question was, do you believe landlords should be able to evict tenants just because their lease is up? And then in the poll write up, I gave background on the good cause eviction law here. And so the results that we got were 53% said yes, tenants should be able to evict, I mean, landlords should be able to evict tenants. 29% said no, 18% said I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. So
Um,
it's not, I wouldn't say a strong majority, but at least more people are saying yes than no in this particular poll, right? The no number is pretty low.
Right. The no number here, the straight no number was 29%.
Yeah.
Yes was 53%. Not sure was 18. So, you know, th- you would say people can see both ways a little bit in there, or they just don't, not sure where to put their opinion on here. So, we had there were a bunch of comments on here. There was a lot of discussion on this. Some people were saying that we need, what we need is cheaper housing, not laws that manipulate the market. Uh-oh. Um, so some of the other comments that we've got here, and we brought up in our discussion, was that the problem with the law is that there can be a bad tenant who does not breach the lease, and so they could still be in there unless they do something that would give them good cause to be out. So a landlord could be stuck with a bad tenant or somewhat of a bad tenant behavior-wise. But that becomes an issue as well. And so that brought up a lot of discussion here. Someone gave the example of a tenant who um, kind of like had intolerance for any noise from their neighbors. And so they would constantly complain. And so the landlord wanted them out because they were being disruptive basically to all the other tenants because they were intolerant of any noise. But because of this type of law, they're paying their stuff on time. They're not causing any sort of outward disturbance. They
Mhm.
might still be stuck with that tenant.
Yeah,
Although some
yeah,
could see that as disruptive behavior, and you might have to
I
try to
mean,
argue if that's a good cause.
right. It just seems to create a situation now where once you accept a tenant, you're stuck with them forever, potentially, right? Unless the
Right,
tenant decides to leave or they do something to violate the terms of the agreement, right? They are too
right,
disruptive, noisy, damage the property, don't pay rent. All right, if you have a valid reason, the good cause, right? You have a good cause to evict them. But failing that, if they get
right,
in there and they're paying their rent every month and they're not causing issues, it would seem like you basically what indefinitely now they can stay there
right.
unless
Now, as a
you have a holdover situation like was discussed. Remember, we talked about
right,
that where you have to reclaim the property or something like that. But generally
right.
speaking, it doesn't allow the landlord to ever really get rid of that tenant.
Well, see, now on the flip side, there is another aspect to that. If you are a landlord and you're using that as a rental property, I mean, you want to have 100% occupancy because otherwise you're the one paying the monthly mortgage on it. You're not making any
Right.
money off of it. So
Right.
in that aspect, it does protect your um, rental property in that regard. Um,
Yeah.
but it's preventing them from doing these massive rent increases.
Right. And I think that's a big part of the financial aspect of it, right? Part of
Right,
this law also talks about the landlord's inability to jack up the rent, right? There's a
right,
reasonable rent increase that you can give, and it's tied to inflation. And so there's a whole
right,
formula, and you can't go beyond that. Now,
right,
if the person were to leave the premises, right? So now you're no longer in a situation where you're raising the rent on your existing tenant, but
right,
you have a vacant apartment again, and you want to re-rent it to a new person. Now,
right,
if you're saying I want to adjust the rent I'm going to charge based on the market rate or whatever, you would be able to do that because the
right,
apartment will be vacant. You're not raising the rent on an existing tenant. You're just starting from
right,
scratch, essentially, right? And saying, this is what I want to charge for the rent. So
right,
this law makes it harder for the landlord to do that, obviously, because they
right,
can't as freely move that tenant out. The other part of it, though, taking the financial considerations away, is what if you just are tired of that tenant? I mean, what if you just don't like them anymore? I'm serious. What if you get into arguments, you don't like them, they're just rude to you, whatever? They're not breaking the lease necessarily, they're not damaging
right,
the property, they're not failing to pay rent. They're still doing what they need to do legally, but they're kind of an
right,
ass. You want to get rid of them. Well, now you can't.
right. Right. Or that's one situation. Or say, for example, you've got a friend or a family member and you want to rent the place to them. The lease is up and you want to give them a place to stay.
Yeah.
It's your property. The question is, do you have that right to do with it as you please?
Right, right. And I
Um,
wonder if there's a situation that's more, I guess, of a gray area. Like, for example, I don't know, the tenant makes a lot of noise. Maybe they're stomping their feet at 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't sleep, something like that. Now, you might be able to say, all right, well, if I can prove it, maybe I can record it somehow and use that as a reason to evict them. They're disrupting my enjoyment of my property, whatever. But what if it's not so cut and dry? What if the tenant is going to say,
right,
no, that's not true. That's just you have thin floors. When I get up in the middle of the night, sometimes it's not my fault that you hear it. You know what I mean?
right,
It's one of those things where you can't really prove definitively that they're in violation of the contract, but
right,
and they're going to fight it, but you still now can't get rid of them. So you can't use your discretion anymore in a sense,
right,
like that, right? Like it
right,
has to be more cut and dry. Like you got to get them on something concrete that shows a clear violation of the contract.
right, right. And then one last comment here. Someone said this is a blindingly terrible idea. Leaving when the lease ends is absolutely basic contract necessity. It's absolutely nuts to even suggest otherwise.
Right. Although it's not necessarily a new concept in that you do have the month to month situation, which has always been the case. If the lease is up,
Mm.
right? And you don't have a new lease with them, but they stay and they continue to pay rent. Legally, you're in a month-to-month lease, right? It basically
Right.
renews every 30 days. But this just says now, if you're in that situation, the landlord cannot get you out of there
Right.
unless they're damaging the
So,
property or not paying rent, et cetera.
there's I know I said the last one was the last question, but I just saw this one, and this is a good question here. Does this law apply equally to all types of landlords, or do corporate landlords get their magic loopholes? Do
Yeah,
we know about that?
when we looked at it, it did have, I think, a small landlord definition, though I'm not sure that larger landlords are exempt from the entirety of the law. I know it did attempt to differentiate, though, between small landlords and non-small landlords. So
Right. Okay.
we can pull this law back up again and see which sections would apply to which.
Okay. Interesting. So, yeah, that's I hadn't thought about that in the previous conversation. Does that also apply to commercial real estate?
It seems actually, it seems actually to be the opposite. Hold on, if this is correct.
Right.
Small landlords are exempt from this. So from what I'm seeing here, the good cause eviction law protects tenants in unregulated apartments from evictions without good cause. The law applies to most apartments, but there are exemptions, including units owned by small landlords, and that's defined as landlords who own 10 units or fewer in New York State. So it isn't necessarily,
Okay.
I was going to say, it
Well,
isn't
that you know
necessarily,
what, that does change things a little bit.
it isn't necessarily the building, although it also has an exemption for owner occupied buildings with 10 units or fewer, right? So if you have a house and you live in it and you're renting out one of the floors or whatever, then you would be exempt from these regulations as well.
Right. And if you have, a few apartments. So if it applies to people with 10 units or more, this seems like it applies more to some of these big companies that are buying up a bunch of rental properties all over
Oh,
the
oh,
country.
like a big apartment building, maybe.
Right, right. But I wonder if it also applies, I guess it's saying apartment, so it wouldn't apply to commercial real estate. If you
Oh,
own
yeah,
if you
yeah,
own
right.
a
Like
business
a
space.
business. Yeah, I think that's a different situation. This is for
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah. So okay. All
It
right.
also, by the way, exempts condos and co-ops. So that's interesting.
Right. Um, question in the comments, can't they off this is in the chat. Can't they offer them a new lease? Well, that's the part here is if they're offering them a new lease, they can, but it's to prevent them from severely jacking up the rent between the old lease and the new lease. So there's also a part in that law that says you can't increase it more than a certain percentage in that regard. So it's I think part of it is to give some protection to renters.
Oh yeah, totally.
Uh,
It's also to give protection to renters, but the question is it formulated the right way, and does it burden the landlords too much?
right. So
You know,
all right,
it's
so we had
I was
oh,
just
go
going to
ahead.
say, I guess my closing thoughts on is that it still kind of rubs me the wrong way that you're interfering with people's ability to form this contract, right? And to enforce essentially this contract. That if you say, I'm going to stay there a year, and again, when you have a lease for a year, it doesn't mean you're only going to be there for 1 year necessarily, but if that's what you agreed to, right? They're renting you
Right.
this property for a year, you agree to that, you're obligated to that. And then when that year ends, you're like, well, I'm not going to sign a new lease, I'm just going to stay, or what, or you can't, basically, if you want me out, you can't get me out, even though you only agreed to have me here for a year, right? It just seems like burdensome on your ability to enter into a contract.
Yeah. So yeah, well, we'll see how it plays out in practice. We had another poll.
My fault for interrupting again. I was just going to say, I am sympathetic to this idea of not jacking rents up on people too much. And so my thought on
Right.
this was, could you say, and maybe this is bad for landlords too, but could you say that those increases that you're regulating are also applicable to situations where you have a new tenant come in? So, in other words, you're still not able to unreasonably raise the rent, but you can get a tenant out after the lease is up. But just when the new tenant comes in, you can't charge them like 3 times as much rent. Like you still have to have a reasonable increase from what it was before. Could that be a different
Right.
way?
Right.
So just a thought. All right, go ahead.
I was gonna say we had another poll that we talked about, and this was on the subject of the executive order to end birthright citizenship. We talked about the potential illegality of it, how this is a 14th Amendment issue, and there was a possible way that they were trying to get around this. So our question that we asked outright was, do you think the executive order ending birthright citizenship will be overturned by the courts? And the results were 57% said yes, 33% said no, 9% said I'm not sure. So most people think that the courts will overturn it.
Yeah. Now we have to be careful, I guess, with the phrasing of this. And I think when we asked it, we intended to ask, what will the ultimate resolution of this be? Because we know that courts, at least
Right.
one court I'm aware of, already stopped it, and we knew that was going to happen.
Yeah. There's like
Right.
22 states that have filed against this already.
Right. And I know of at least one federal court, right, that said it was unconstitutional and put a stop to
Right.
it. The question is, what's going to happen on appeal, right? When it
Right.
ultimately works its way up to the Supreme Court, what's going to happen then? And so
Right.
that's really what I want to know. And I just don't know if some people voting yes are voting yes because they think, well, some courts will overturn it, but how is it going to end up?
Right. Well, in the description, the write-up, I made sure to put in this idea that they could that I believe that this approach is intended to circumvent the 14th Amendment, to just change the interpretation, and so that they could end birthright citizenship without having to go through changing the amendment by doing this judicial interpretation. So I did make sure that information was in there. Um,
Right. But are they voting on whether it will be stopped ultimately or whether some courts might overturn it on the way up?
um, that I'm not specifically sure on. Um, so some person, one of the first comment here says, the wording of the amendment is fairly clear. I think it's a given that every court up to the Supreme Court would strike down the order, but who knows what the court, who knows what the current Supremes will make of it. So
The current Supremes, like Diana
yeah,
Ross?
that's what he put, the current Supremes. It's an interesting way of calling them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they
It's
said
interesting
if
though
the
that
Supreme Court.
they have faith in every court in the land except for that one. That's pretty sad.
And I think a lot of people probably, have a similar feeling because we've seen this very biased Supreme Court that we've got now. And he ends his statement off by saying, if the Supreme Court would allow the president to ignore the Constitution in such a clear case, that's basically the end of constitutional governance in America.
Yeah, okay. Listen, I don't disagree with these comments, but I also have a feeling they're not written by lawyers. And okay, why would they be? It's a poll on a website, but some of the stuff that you
Are you saying lawyers don't use websites? You
no,
use Reddit.
I'm saying they're more likely. I don't know. When I hear things like this, I'm thinking a lawyer's not going to say that. You know what I mean? But all right, I get it.
Yeah. So and here's a comment
You know
here,
what
and
it
I
is?
think
This is giving me flashbacks to some clients. Every lawyer will have a story about this where a client who's not a lawyer, right, will come to you and be like, I've got a case. It's a clear cut case. It's open and shut. And
right, right,
you're like, no, it's much more complicated than you think it is, which is why you need more.
right,
You know what I mean? It's not a clear cut, open and shut case. And
right,
it happens every single time too, like where you go into a court, you'll be fighting your client's position, right, to the death. It's a hardcore court battle here, and you do very well. But the other side, or your clients will come out of it saying, "How come the judge didn't immediately bang the gavel and throw the other side out of court, and throw them in jail for even having the guts to challenge us? Like it was such an open and shut case. Why is the judge
right,
even deliberating on this? This is so easy. You know what I
right.
mean? It's like no, it's not easy. If it was easy, you would do it. So it's just what I mean. It's so when you hear things like that, like it's so open and shut, you cringe a
Are
little
you
bit.
triggered? Are you triggered,
Yeah,
Mike? Is that what this?
yeah, it makes you cringe a little bit as a lawyer. With that said, this is one of those cases where it kind of should be. You know what I mean? Now we talked about there are avenues that they can go down to try.
The yeah, interpreting that specific clause.
Right, right. And so there is room there, whether we like it or not. There is
Right,
room for the court to manipulate that language and that law.
right.
And so,
Right. And I made sure to put that in there to
yeah,
try to give to give a little bit more context.
yeah.
That there are exceptions and there have been exceptions like with diplomats, etc.
Right, right. Now, even with all that being the case, the law up until now and how it's been interpreted all this time has been
Right.
for anyone born in the US to be a citizen, generally speaking, right? Again, there are exceptions, but
Right.
it doesn't matter. The exceptions aren't the uh, immigration status of your parents, right?
Right.
That has never come into play, and there's been
Right.
law, cases standing for that, right? And so if the
Right.
Supreme Court were to uphold this action, they would be reversing what the current
Right.
constitutional law is. With that said, there is still areas that they can play around with, and so
Right.
I would still be careful before calling it an open and shut case. It's again, nothing is ever that black and white, and it is the Supreme Court we're talking about, and that cynicism is well founded.
Right. One of the comments here, and this is I think we might have touched on this in our discussion of it. Um, And they say if undocumented immigrants were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, that would allow the interpretation that their children are not citizens by birthright. But it would also mean that undocumented immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of any U.S. law enforcement, and they could break any law and every law with impunity. You can't
Yeah,
have it both ways.
but see, that's not really the case. That okay,
Right,
that would be the case if you're going to treat them as diplomats, right? Because
right,
that's where the subject to the jurisdiction language really comes from, right? Diplomat.
right,
And so if you're going to say, well, we're going to treat undocumented immigrants the same way we do diplomats, then yeah, but that's not what they're getting at. They're
right,
saying that they're not subject to the laws, meaning they can be deported, right? That's really what the whole idea of this is. They can be deported. And so they would be subject to the laws of their own country. They can stand trial in their own country, but
right,
we're not going to, according to this, treat them the way we would a citizen and or a lawful resident or whatever, and consider them subject to our laws. We're considering them subject to their home country's laws, even though their home country is the U.S. But they're saying with this
right.
order that it's no longer the U.S. Right? But
So, yeah,
it isn't taking the extra step of giving them diplomatic immunity though.
right. So, like for example, a diplomat, someone with diplomatic immunity, if they committed a crime on U.S. soil, they wouldn't necessarily automatically be subject to our laws. Now, a tourist coming to the U.S.
Yeah,
committing a crime on U.S. soil would be arrested and subject to those crimes,
yeah,
to those
exactly.
laws.
Yeah, exactly. And well, right, well, if a tourist who is not a U.S. citizen. So you're saying that they're a tourist visiting the U.S. from another country, and
Yes.
yeah, so you would send them ordinarily if they committed a crime here, they'd be sent back to their country.
Well, they would be arrested first.
They'd be arrested, but I don't think in
I
most
don't
cases.
think they would be immediately deported. I think they would
Oh
serve
no, no,
some
no.
time
They
here.
go through the process. It's still due process,
Yeah.
right? But my understanding, and I don't practice criminal law, but my understanding is you don't put them in prisons in the U.S. You would deport them back to their country at that point.
I thought they would serve time here first and then be deported.
I think if anything, they might serve time in jail while they're awaiting their trial, and that could take a long time. But if you're actually going to
Mm.
convict them, if you convict someone who's from another country, don't you normally
Right.
report them out? Because that's what happens.
Um, I thought they would, yeah, I guess we're both unclear about this part of it, but I thought they would serve their time here and then be deported.
But see, I think that's again subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. If they're not subject to our jurisdiction, how do we have the ability to punish them via the
Right.
system?
Yeah. So, um, that may be one to ask maybe a criminal attorney, or we can ask AI.
Yeah.
Um, let me see. I'm going to ask this here. Uh, would they serve their sentence? And I'm asking Gemini.
Okay.
Um, uh, Um, let's see here. And Gemini says it depends on the severity of the crime. For minor crimes, the tourist may be deported immediately upon conviction. For more serious crimes, the tourist may be required to serve their sentence in the U.S. before being deported. Um, and that determination's made by the U.S. government and based on a number of factors, um, including the severity, the criminal
Right.
history, and the tourist ties to the U.S. So I
Right.
guess there's a situation where both could be the
It-
case.
it's situational then.
Yeah, yeah. So that makes sense. You know, I think if a tourist commits murder here, they're not going to just deport them. They're going to probably want to put them to serve time.
Well, and the thing also is if you're a tourist, it depends. So you're saying under this example that they got a tourist visa or whatever, right?
Yeah,
They're basically agreeing to subject themselves to our country's laws while they're here. Now,
right, right, right.
what if they're
Well, the thing is, not all countries need to. So people coming from Japan don't have to get a specific tourist visa.
okay? But I think it's still technically considered a visa when you come in through customs and they sign your passport or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's
So,
still a visa. It's just permission to be in the country for that temporary period.
right, right. So,
Yeah, but if you're not though, like if you don't go through those channels at all, right? Let's say you just sneak in across the border or whatever.
right,
You're a foreign national, right? You're not agreeing to subject yourself to the U.S. laws. I mean, I guess an argument could be made that just by your mere presence you are, but
right,
right, I think that's why usually you just end up deporting people like that back to their country because they weren't part of our system in the first place.
right. All right. Well, yeah, those were the making up of the poll questions we had, and we got a new one for next week. So I think we're caught up.
Okay, sounds good.
Um,
Is that about everything?
I think so. And I know there's going to be a lot of insane things by next week because that's what we're into these days. That's what's happening these days.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have more later.
Okay, so to be continued, I guess, and we look forward to the poll responses. Give us your thoughts on the Super Bowl show now that you've had time to digest it, right? What do you think? And
Yeah.
where does it stand? Where does it rank amongst the all-time great shows? I know the Prince show gets a lot of praise. The press conference he did prior to the Super Bowl, for some reason, is looked at as even better than the halftime performance he gave. That was part of the proclamation that I actually drafted for Prince when he passed away. I got to draft New York
Mm,
State's proclamation honoring Prince, and it was passed by the legislature. And so when I was researching it, I saw that he got high praise for the halftime show press conference he did prior to the show. And that alone, the press conference, I guess it was an impromptu performance or something like that. They didn't expect him to do it, but
mm,
it broke out into the song. Something happened there where they consider that moment to be amongst the top moments in halftime show history, even though it didn't take place at the actual halftime show. So
mm.
that one gets a lot of high praise. Uh, I don't know what are the best ones. Like I said, I'm a hip hop head, so I most appreciate the hip hop shows.
I told you, listen, you can't be the best if you don't show any boobs. Like that's just what it is.
So you're going with Justin and Janet. That's your number one.
And it's just what it is. You can't top that.
Is that a bottom line, Jay?
Yeah, you can't be the best if you don't show any nipple. That's it. That's the bottom line.
Wow.
And that applies to men or women.
Yeah,
You gotta do
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So
Well, you know what though? Metaphorically speaking, I think that applies to the Kendrick show, not in a physical sense, where we said
you're
everyone.
talking about spectacle, basically.
Right, right. What I'm saying is letting it all hang out in a sense. You know what I mean?
Well,
Yeah.
I think what we could take from this is like, listen, of course, there are gonna be people who like it, people who don't like it, regardless of who the performer is. I'm sure there are people who dislike the Prince show.
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't always have to be spectacle.
Right,
Right.
right.
There can be something deeper to it. There can be time for messages. There can be time for something that's entertaining, but also um, uh, informative or that speaks to you.
Hey,
And
rest call
so
edutainment.
entertainment, yeah, there there has to be room for that as well. It can't
I
always
agree.
just be something that's just about razzle dazzle, even
Right,
though,
right.
this, so that's what it is. There'll be another one next year. Chill out. If you didn't like this one, um, maybe next year's for you.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe it'll open up some minds. Maybe some people will start to appreciate the steak as much as the sizzle. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So people can find us everywhere. Things can be found. Get your podcasts, Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. We're on Daily Coast. We're on Reddit.
Yeah.
Yeah, join the conversation. Let us know what you think. As always, thank you for joining us. We've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time.